When did you realize your family is not normal? My parents hosted Christmas one year when I was a teen. A bunch of our family came over and got super drunk. Our Jewish neighbor called and said we should all stop by and say hi at their Hanukkah party. 10 to 15 drunk people walked down the street barefoot and with pitchers of mixed drinks in our hands. We entered their house and they were having a very quiet Hanukkah with 10 very sober-seeming people eating and talking here and there. That quickly changed to 20 to 25 super loud drunk people having fun and at one point having a Southern rap battle where everyone contributed to the song with their best Southern accent and Southern verses. The next day our neighbor thanked us so much for coming. He said everyone, including the old Jewish ladies, had a blast.
That sounds like a wild Christmas. The contrast must have been pretty funny, especially with the rap battle. Surprising that the older folks enjoyed it too. It's cool that you managed to bring some unexpected fun to their night.
It took me an embarrassingly long time to realize that not everyone's mom will come up with a song for the pets. My mom sings about our dogs wearing pajamas in the car. When the dogs get excited and start running around, she will sing them a song. She has made a song for each of our pets. They all have their own personal lyrics and tune. Some of us have started singing the songs when we see that specific pet and some of the pets now respond. My tortoiseshell will bound up and meow at you if you sing her song. Edit, people seem to like the pajama song. Here it is, who's a dog? / yes you are. / cause dogs wear pajamas / in the car. / cause they're dogs. Edit 2, my mom will also grab someone's tummy, be it human or animal, and sing, must be jelly cause jam don't jiggle like that, jug a jug, whilst jiggling aforementioned belly.
That's a pretty unique approach. It's interesting how your mom connects with the pets through those songs. It seems like a fun way to interact with them. The idea of pets having their own theme songs is kind of charming. It's cool that some of the pets even respond to their tunes.
Every year for Easter my parents would set up a video camera in the living room overnight so that we can catch the Easter bunny in the act while he hid our baskets and colored eggs around the house. We would go to bed right after we set it up and started recording. After about 20 minutes of recording, a stuffed animal bunny would be hopping around the living room using a stop-motion technique that my parents used, hopping around hiding our eggs and baskets. As kids we thought it was absolutely amazing that we caught the real Easter bunny in the act. When we would have family over for Easter dinner we would show everyone how sneaky and clever we were that we got it on camera. Kinda weird, but I cannot wait to do this to my kids one day.
That sounds like a fun tradition. The idea of capturing the Easter bunny on video must have been exciting for you as a kid. It's interesting how parents can create such magical experiences. It's cool you want to continue it with your kids. They'll probably love it just like you did.
Growing up my dad was an alcoholic and there was a lot of yelling and arguments in the house. I had a sleepover at a friend's house and they made dinner together, actually were like those TV families that were cooperative and stuff. There was no yelling and the dad was helping out around the house and playing with my friend's siblings. It was a sleepover and I fell asleep silently crying because I never knew families could be functional and happy. Edit, thanks for the replies guys. I was 16 at the sleepover and I'm 26 now. Dad has been sober for almost a year now and is a huge help as a grandpa to my daughter. I actually moved back to my parents' house and am rebuilding a relationship with my dad I never had before. Smiley face.
It's tough to grow up in a chaotic environment. Seeing a different family dynamic at that sleepover must have been eye-opening. It's good to hear that things have changed for your dad and you. Rebuilding your relationship takes time, but it's nice that he's now a positive presence in your daughter's life. Hope things continue to improve for you all.
Well, when I was a kid, I noticed when people asked me where my dad was and I didn't have an answer for them. Hell if I know. I know who he is, but not where he went. Aside from that, in high school I just consciously looked around and realized that damn near the entire family I grew up with was female. There was no male influence to speak of. My aunt and mom were divorcee single moms who were thick as thieves, and my cousin and I practically grew up as sisters. I actually mentioned it one Christmas and my mom growled, "We're like a clan of hyenas. We laugh at inappropriate times and men fear us." Then she started cackling. She may have been drinking.
It sounds like you had a unique childhood experience. Growing up mostly around women gave you a different perspective on family dynamics. The joke about being like a clan of hyenas is interesting, and it shows the strong bond you all had. It must have felt odd not having a male role model around. The humor in that situation is relatable, though.
When I was 8 and found my parents, empty methadone bottles in a bag to go back to the methadone clinic. The next time I was at the library, I embarked on an hour of research using the Encyclopedia Britannica and various medical books and magazines. This was back in the 80s. I eventually figured out that methadone was for drug addicts to stop doing drugs. I read about heroin and how bad it was. I read about what methadone clinic were and how people didn't like junkies. And then, it slowly dawned on me why every day after kindergarten my dad used to take me into the nearest city to hang out at in the kids' play area of this weird clinic. The people there were always nice, but I never knew why we were there. I realized then that, even though I didn't totally understand it, my parents had struggles that were much different than those of most parents. I think my parents knew I had figured it out. A few months later they explained everything to me. They had both been heroin addicts before my birth but had gotten clean. They both stayed clean the rest of their lives, both too short, sadly. My dad stayed on methadone till the day he died decades later. They were awesome, amazing parents. But the methadone is, as they say, liquid handcuffs. We could never really go on family trips because he had to be at the clinic to pick up his dose. And money was sometimes tight because methadone is expensive. And the most weird thing that made us not like other families was always having this secret. No matter how normal they seemed, or how successful their lives were, the past addiction always loomed just overhead.
This story shares a unique perspective on growing up with parents who had a history of addiction. It's interesting how the author pieces together the clues from childhood, realizing the impact of their parents' choices. The balance between their struggles and being good parents is notable. Even with the challenges, it shows their resilience. The idea of having a secret adds depth to their experience. It's a mix of normalcy and complexity in family life.
When my dad had to go to a rehabilitation center for suicidal tendencies. He had mapped out my mom's finances for the next 5 years based off of her salary and his life insurance, and had planned to hang himself. When he presented his plan to my mother, she said he'd read it to her as plainly as if he was reading off a grocery list for her approval. He seriously thought it was a good idea, because in his mind, his depression caused him to be a drain on her. That or by the third time we were rushing out to my half-sister's college town for another suicide attempt, only to again find her happy to see us and happy for the extra attention. She has borderline personality disorder. We don't speak.
It's hard to imagine dealing with situations like these. The way he approached his plan shows how deeply his struggles affected him. It's tough when mental health issues create such serious impacts on family dynamics. It sounds like a lot of unresolved tension and difficult emotions there. I hope everyone involved can find some peace and support moving forward.
I was in first grade, and some local cops came and ate lunch at school with us. One sat next to me. I was so excited to meet a cop in person I asked if he knew my mom. He did. Something about the way he responded immediately made me realize this was not a good thing. My mother, my whole family, really, has a very long history of drug abuse, burglary, vandalism, assault/battery, a few murder investigations, no charges, I think, etc., etc., etc. I'm not really sure how I turned out so well, all things considered.
It's interesting how your perception of authority can shift in a moment. It sounds like you've managed to navigate a tough situation and come out okay. Not everyone does, so that speaks to something about your own choices. Life can be unpredictable like that.
I was in my first therapy session. I explained to the therapist that I had just gone crazy 10 years ago for no reason, and I felt really bad about imposing my crazy on my family. But she pointed out I had also told her my sister was on the autism spectrum and tried to murder me several times. I don't want to insinuate that one led to the other, but both were difficult for me for different reasons. My dad literally wouldn't come home from work sometimes, and my mom spent at least half the month in bed with migraines for most of my childhood before going temporarily crazy due to hypothyroidism. Later I'd come to realize Dad is also an alcoholic pothead. And we're one of the sanest branches of my family, so...
It sounds like you've been through a lot. Therapy can help sort through all that family history. It's not easy to deal with mental health issues in the family. Recognizing these patterns can be the first step. Hope you're finding some clarity in those sessions. It's a long journey, but talking about it is definitely a start. Keep at it.
My mom's new boyfriend came to dinner and we were supposed to be on our best behavior. All was good until my sister talked about a boyfriend with that last name Titball. Jokes ensued, Titball, etc. My other sister had just taken a bite and laughed so hard after hearing Titball that she threw up on her hand at the table. My mom, completely mortified and also has a weak stomach, started gagging. I then proceeded to laugh at my mom's reaction so hard that my nose bled, and then I started vomiting on the floor. No worries though. Along comes the dog to mop up the vomit with his tongue. Typical family dinner.
That's quite a dinner scene. Sounds like chaos unfolded fast. It's funny how just one word can trigger everything. The dog stepping in to clean up? Classic. Family dinners can really go off the rails sometimes, but it seems like you all handled it in your own way.
I first noticed it when I thought to myself, the families of these other kids sure are a lot more loving than mine. I don't even remember what age I realized this, I just know I was probably a toddler. It got to the point where if I was shown too much affection without being ignored, hit, or yelled at, I'd have a panic attack. I thought I deserved everything that happened to me for years, and tried to downplay it and dissociate myself from it as much as I could. This was until I was 13, and somebody flat out told me I was being abused, and did nothing to warrant the treatment. It's still hard for me to deal with.
That's a tough situation to be in. Realizing you were in an abusive environment at such a young age must have been confusing. It's strange how easily we can internalize that kind of pain and think it's our fault. Being told it's not your fault can be a turning point, but it doesn't erase the struggle. It's good you're acknowledging it now, even if it's hard. Healing takes time.
When everyone at my work was confused that at 18 years old, I had to ask permission to go outside. I mean, there are other things, like I was taught to be skeptical and angry and judgmental towards anyone else who wasn't in my immediate family. But I did outgrow that, and I have a lot more friends now, and I'm friendlier to people. My parents, on the other hand, are still very negative, bitter people who have no friends whatsoever, who never go out and do anything, and they are both in their early 40s. Kind of a sad life, but they brought it on themselves by being bitter and judgy people.
It's interesting how upbringing shapes us. The shift from skepticism to being open can really impact social life. It's good to hear you've made that change and built friendships. Your parents seem stuck in their ways, which can be tough to watch. Their negativity probably holds them back from having a more fulfilling life. Everyone has their own path, I guess. It's good you're moving in a different direction.
The day my father refused to perform the wedding for me and my wife. He's qualified to do so and has done the ceremony for a couple of his friends. We grew up very religious. I left the church at 18, his best friend, at the time, was the pastor of our church, and my dad was the administrator of the Christian school that the church was tied to the school. His grounds for refusing to marry us was that she didn't go to church enough, and I have no idea what her beliefs are. Great job welcoming your future daughter-in-law to the family, Dad. Great job.
It's pretty disappointing when family can't support you on such an important day. It's strange how beliefs can create divides. You'd think a wedding would be a moment of unity, but instead, it turned into tension. It's tough to feel like your relationship is being judged based on someone else's faith. Can't believe he'd let that get in the way of a family celebration.
Whenever my mother would admire something my grandmother owned, she would say in all seriousness, "When you die, I want that." I never really thought of the implications of that statement as a child, but as a teenager it finally hit me. I also realized my mother had literally no sense of accountability for herself, and has a completely external locus of control, i.e. everything that happens to her is because of something external. She literally acts like she is powerless to change anything in her situation.
Your mother's comment reflects a complicated relationship with your grandmother's belongings and perhaps the way she views her own life. The lack of accountability you see in her might be a significant part of that dynamic. It's a lot to unpack, and it seems to have shaped your understanding of her perspective.
Our family car was a hearse. My grandpa was into taxidermy, so we always had all these animals that he'd mount or make into lamps. My mom and I used to go out for mother/daughter bonding trips, doing gravestone rubbings or exploring abandoned hospitals, buildings, and cemeteries. My stepdad keeps his dead mother's wig, and when he gets drunk he puts it on. They have a hollowed-out dildo that they put on the water tap in the sink when guests come over. They have so many dead animals that our basement literally has boxes labeled gators and turtle shells. All our Christmas decorations were jacked up in some way, too, like they taped a big faux knife to animatronic Santa's hand, so when he moves it looks like he's about to stab you. My grandfather died this past summer, and when I came home to visit, I found my mother had put his favorite hat and sunglasses on the urn. I dunno, my childhood was a wild ride. We're like a less murdery Addams family.
That's quite the upbringing. The Christmas decorations with a twist are something else too. It's interesting to hear how you view your childhood as a wild ride, maybe a bit dark but clearly memorable.
Growing up, my mother was always really weird. Our house was always messy even though she spent all day in the house, and she was always having strange episodes. Once, she had laryngitis and didn't speak for weeks. I only recently found out that she did not have laryngitis, she just refused to speak to her family. For weeks. Keep in mind my siblings and I were just kids at the time. Anyway, I assumed that everyone else's mums were all weird too. One day, I had a friend over after school. We walked into the house and my mum was lying in the middle of the floor, not moving. She was so weirded out and said, "Is she okay?" I replied, "Yes, she's fine, let's go upstairs and play games." I was totally unfazed, but my friend kept bringing it up and it was then I realized something was off.
This is an interesting story about growing up with an unconventional mom. It's wild how kids can normalize odd situations without thinking twice. The friend's reaction highlights how different perspectives can show you things you might not notice. The whole laryngitis thing is something else too. It's a unique take on family dynamics for sure. You just carried on as if it was all normal.
I was naive to the fact that not all siblings were super close. My mom was close to her 5 siblings and dad was an only child. My best childhood friend was a family of 7 kids, all close. Still to this day my bro and sis are my best friends. We argue, we vent, we hug, we laugh, we support, we argue again and hug again. It was really into my 20s when I realized saying stuff like, "Why didn't you just tell your sister," or "Why didn't your brother come over to help," was not always socially acceptable to assume siblings meant instant support and unconditional love. I am blessed.
It's interesting how family dynamics can vary. It makes you realize how unique your situation is. Not everyone has that level of support and connection. It's a reminder that every family is different, and that blessings shouldn't be taken for granted.
It's not that my mother doesn't get social cues, she just doesn't give a shit about them. To give some context, in Sweden it's seen as pretty weird to chat up strangers unless you have to, or if you're stuck together for an extended time. Me and my brother wanted to go swimming once. Not at our own beach, no, we wanted to go to the public one with diving towers. So off we go in the budding rain, and my mother ends up sitting on a bench next to some woman who's there on her own. Turns out she was on holidays on the island we were on, but all hotel rooms were either twin rooms or extremely expensive, so she decided to sleep in her car at a beach, where you'll always find a toilet. My mother looks at her tiny car, and decides to invite her over to our place. She would take my brother's room, and he would move into mine. She ended up sharing a bottle of wine and stories from her life, and it was actually quite fun, but it's just something most people wouldn't do, especially in Sweden.
Not everyone would be comfortable with that kind of spontaneity, but it worked out for her.